You won't ever see a professional golfer using a putter on the driving range. There are many, many different types of drumsticks, and we want to make sure we use the right stick for the job. I grew up in a very small town in Colorado. There were no private music teachers where I lived. At one point, we drove 3 hours to the nearest city. One of the most common problems with young players is they're not sure which sticking they should use when they're presented with a piece of music. This exercise is invaluable when you see these rhythms. I'm Heath with Musicians Toolkit. Thank you for joining me for this series of videos on the fundamentals of beginning snare drumming. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Heath with Musicians Toolkit. I'm excited to have you with me today as we go over basic snare drum technique. Today we will be learning the basic strokes, the muscle groupings used to create those strokes, and then we will learn some exercises that will help you apply those strokes to your actual playing. Let's get started. Now that we've learned the rebound stroke, let's learn an exercise that will help you to practice it. This exercise is called 8 on a hand, and it is exactly what it sounds like. We're going to do 8 strokes on the right hand, followed by 8 strokes on the left hand. And we will repeat that over and over again. We're going to make sure we use our metronome. We're going to make sure that we're not going too fast. I would recommend somewhere around 70 to 80 beats per minute on your metronome. And you're going to be listening for that quality of sound, always. Repeat over and over again. This stroke needs to become like breathing. If you're thinking about it, we don't know the stroke well enough. One of the exercises I like to have young students do is play 8 on a hand and say the Pledge of Allegiance out loud at the same time. If you can do that, that stroke has now become very comfortable for you. If you stutter while saying the Pledge of Allegiance, or if it sounds very mechanical, then you're still not comfortable enough with the rebound stroke. Once you've played it slowly, you can gradually start to speed up that metronome to faster tempos, such as this. Again, if the consistency of sound changes, you need to check your stroke. A great way to practice this is in front of a mirror so you can watch your hands. Some things I want you to watch out for. If your stick is going parallel with the drum, you are using too much arm. And you need to start using a little bit more wrist and relaxing a little bit more. You also need to make sure that your stick is not doing what we call slicing, which means the stick is coming from the side. If that is happening, usually it is because you have rolled your hand over to where the thumb is going up towards the ceiling. If you roll your hand back over with your palm down, that will fix your slicing problem. You need to practice 8 on a hand for at least 3 to 4 minutes a day, non-stop, when you first begin playing at various tempos. And that will really help to develop that rebound stroke. When you're first learning the up and down strokes, they can kind of seem almost like pointless exercises, especially when we have to practice them so slow. But as I mentioned earlier, they're extremely important to more advanced concepts. So I'd like to take a moment to show you how we apply those exercises to more advanced playing. I'm going to play a short 2-measure segment twice. The rhythm will be the same both times. Here is the first example. Obviously, that was just 2 measures of rebound strokes. I'm now going to play the exact same rhythm, but this time I'm going to use a combination of upstrokes and downstrokes. Even though the rhythm of those 2 examples was exactly the same, they sounded very different. The reason is, on the second example, I used a combination of upstrokes and downstrokes. I hope you can see through this example why it is so important that you practice your upstrokes and downstrokes. If you master those skills, you will then be able to apply them to the more advanced techniques that I just demonstrated. Let's learn a couple of exercises that will help us improve our bucks, or the combination of downstrokes and upstrokes. The first one is going to have a measure of just plain rebound strokes, and then we'll go into a measure of bucks with the accent on the downbeat. It will sound like this. Then repeat on the left hand. And then clone. Once you get comfortable with that, you can start to speed it up. Do not sacrifice the height of your taps for speed. Make sure they stay 1.5 inches to 2 inches off the drum. The next exercise is extremely similar to that. The only difference is, instead of the accent of the bucks being on the downbeat, it will be on the upbeat, or the and, if you would like to think of it that way. So it will sound like this. Repeat it with the left hand. And then clone. Slowly at first. If you get to a point where you feel very comfortable with that, then you can gradually begin to speed it up. Remember to never sacrifice technique for speed. This is an exercise that needs to be practiced over and over again until you develop mastery. Now we're going to combine upstrokes and downstrokes together. This exercise is commonly known as bucks. So let's talk through it. We're going to play a downstroke, which, as we know, starts high and ends low. We squeeze at the bottom, and the stick stops exactly at the point where we want our upstroke to start. So now we play our upstroke, starting low and ending high. If I do that without pausing in between, it should sound like this. Downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke. Watch the height of your stick at the bottom especially. If it starts to creep up into this range, you've got to concentrate on squeezing a little bit more at the bottom so that stick doesn't rebound quite so far up. Remember, as we do our upstroke, you're going to be lifting with the wrist. And then we, of course, do it on our left hand as well, and the height should be exactly the same. You can then clone this exercise as well. This exercise will pay big dividends when practiced correctly, and these techniques are used many, many times in more advanced playing, as we will see later in this series. I'd like to share with you a practice technique that will really help you get better faster. This technique is called cloning. All of us have a dominant hand, meaning you're either right-handed or left-handed. As you're practicing, you will notice that your dominant hand picks up things faster. Studies have shown that if you can have your weak hand play exactly what your dominant hand does, that the weak hand will actually pick up the techniques faster. This is what we call cloning. So let's apply that to the exercise we just learned called 8 on a hand. We learned 8 on a hand by playing 8 strokes on one hand and then 8 strokes on the other hand, such as this. If I was to clone 8 on a hand, I would have both sticks play the exact same thing. The weak hand is mimicking what the strong hand is doing. So a great way to practice 8 on a hand would be to add cloning at the end of the exercise, like this. Cloning is a great way to get your weak hand to catch up to your strong hand. While you're doing the cloning, really try to make sure that both sticks strike the head at the same time. If you're getting this effect, then we want to slow down the exercise until you can get both sticks to strike at the same time. Apply cloning to the exercises we're going to learn, and you'll get better a lot faster. Before we start actually playing the drum, we're going to talk about an extremely important concept if you're going to be successful. The name of the game in snare drumming is consistency. Consistency of tone, consistency of tempo, and consistency of volume. What does that mean? When we're playing snare drum, we need the sound to be the same, always. That's one of the reasons when we talked about setting up our drum that we made sure that the snare bed is going directly over our playing surface. If I play this drum right in the center and I'm using correct technique, it should produce the same tone over and over again. If my technique is faulty and my stroke is not accurate, you will hear different sounds coming from the drum. We cannot have that as a snare drummer. You also have to be extremely aware of where you are playing the drum. If I have one stick in the correct playing area and one stick that has slipped off to the side a little bit, you're going to hear two very different sounds. If I try to play a hand-to-hand pattern with that, it almost sounds like I'm playing two different drums. If I move that stick back where it's supposed to be, then we are getting a consistent sound. So every exercise we are playing, you need to be using the most valuable tool you have, which is your ears, and making sure that the sound you are producing out of your drum is consistent. If you do that, you will automatically sound like a more mature snare drummer. Now let's learn an exercise to apply the double strokes that we just learned. The first measure of the exercise is just going to be one measure of alternating 16th notes. The second measure will be also 16th notes, but now we will be using our double strokes. So if I put the two measures together, we should have this. Make sure you start with your left hand as well. Make sure that as you transition from the first measure to the second measure, that the speed of your 16th notes stays the same and the sound quality stays the same. If you get something like this, then we need to slow down the tempo so we can relax and get more consistent double strokes. You also want to make sure, again, that you're playing on the proper area on your drum. If one stick is in the wrong spot, you're going to get a very inconsistent sound. Take this exercise and gradually start to increase the tempo. There's going to come a point where you cannot speed up anymore and your wrists have basically maxed out at the speed that they can play this exercise. And that's okay, because at that point we will transition into the next stroke we're going to learn, the double bounce. Let's learn an exercise that will help us develop our downstrokes. We're going to start with 8 rebound strokes, just like 8 on a hand. And on the second measure, we're going to do 1 rebound stroke, squeeze the stick for that downstroke, and stay at the bottom. So if I put those two measures together, it will sound like this. Of course, we're going to repeat that on our left hand as well to make sure we're getting balance between the hands. Also, cloning this exercise would be a great idea to help that weak hand catch up to our strong hand. Practice this exercise very slowly in front of a mirror, and remember our rules: consistency of tone, consistency of tempo. This exercise is very important to learning more advanced techniques in the future lessons. Let's learn an exercise that will help us improve our drags. We're going to start off with 2 single strokes on the right hand, followed by 2 flams on the right hand, followed by 3 drags. So it will sound like this. We'll repeat the exercise on the left hand. And then we will play 7 alternating drags. So if I play the whole exercise together, it will sound like this. Again, practice very slowly. Make sure you have your metronome on. It's very common to try and play this faster than you should before your hands are ready to do that. Practice it slowly until your technique is sound, and then you can begin speeding it up. Let's talk about 8th note rolls at faster tempos. As we discussed with our quarter note rolls and our skeletons, the slower the music is, the faster your skeleton is going to be. The faster the music is, the slower your skeleton is going to be. That same principle applies when we're playing eighth note rolls. So let's look at this example that we have listed here. In measure 1, we have the skeleton of an eighth note roll with the roll being on the downbeats. Instead of playing the triplet version that we use for the slower tempos, we're now going to use a 16th note version. So that skeleton would sound like this. In the second measure, I simply put a multiple bounce on each of those 16th notes, and that gives me my eighth note roll. And the third measure is how you would actually see this eighth note roll notated in music. So if I play those three measures together, we get this. On the second half of the exercise, we simply shift the roll to the and, or the upbeat, of the eighth notes. So the skeleton would be this. This is again in measure 4. In the next measure, I simply put multiple bounce strokes on each of the 16th notes. And then the last measure again is how you would see eighth note rolls on the upbeats or the ands notated in music. So the last three measures would sound like this. If I put the whole exercise together, we get this. Practice with a metronome, listen for a smooth, consistent sound, and you can speed up the tempo from there once you feel like you have that tempo under control. Now let's apply our multiple bounce stroke to eighth note rolls. If you look at measure 3 of the exercise, this is how you would normally see eighth note rolls written if the rolls were occurring on the downbeat. Let's look at the skeleton we'll be using, which is in measure 1. That skeleton sounds like this. In measure 2, I use that same rhythm. I'm just putting a multiple bounce on each of those triplet strokes. Measure 3 will sound exactly like measure 2 if executed properly. So if I play the first 3 measures together, we get this. In measure 4, we have the skeleton of an eighth note roll that happens on the upbeats or on the ands. That rhythm sounds like this. In measure 5, I put a multiple bounce on each of the triplet strokes. Measure 6 should sound exactly like measure 5. But measure 6 is how you will normally see these rolls written in music. So if I start on measure 4 and play through measure 6, it will sound like this. Now I'll play the entire exercise. The first 3 measures demonstrating skeletons and rolls that happen on the downbeat of an eighth note, and the last 3 measures demonstrating skeletons and rolls of multiple bounces that happen on the upbeat of an eighth note. This is great for the slower tempos. Practice with your metronome and work towards a nice, consistent sound. Let's learn a fun exercise that will help us improve our flam accents. starts off with a measure of accented triplets, like this. And then we do a measure of flam accents. If we put those two measures together, we have the full exercise. Separate your hands to check your stickings. The flam accent is another one of the very commonly used rudiments that you will find in all sorts of percussion situations. Have a great time practicing it. Now let's learn an exercise that will help us improve our flams. In measure 1, you see we have just a measure of straight eighth notes on the same hand. In measure 2, I'm going to add the grace notes that will create our flam, all on the same hand. In measure 3, I'm going to switch to my left hand and play the eighth notes without a grace note. In measure 4, I will add the grace note to create a left hand flam. And finally, in measure 5, we will do alternating flams right to left. So if I play the whole exercise together, it sounds like this. It's very important that you do not try to practice this too fast. Start very slow and concentrate on your stick heights, especially the heights of the grace note. Remember your bucks, which will help to keep those grace notes under control and at the height we want them at. Practice them a lot, practice them with patience, and as always, listen for the quality of sound. Good luck. Okay, let's learn how to grip the stick. There are two main grips that we use in snare drumming. You have probably seen many people play what we call traditional grip, where one stick is held differently than the other. This is a wonderful grip and you can use it in many situations, but we're not going to learn that grip right now. We are going to learn matched grip. It's called matched grip because both hands are going to match each other. Your grip is probably going to be the most important technical aspect that we learn today. If your grip is correct, you will probably be pretty successful. If your grip is incorrect, you're going to have a lot of problems and put many hurdles in front of you that don't need to be there. So let's take our stick, and we want to be completely relaxed. And we're just going to grab it and have our thumb going down the side of the stick. We're going to have the stick in that main first knuckle and have our index finger wrap around it. Our other fingers are going to gently wrap around the stick as well. You want to think of the stick as an extension of your arm. And since we're going to play match grip and the left hand is going to do the exact same thing, we'll put the thumb down the side, wrap the index finger around, gently wrap our other fingers around. And it should feel fairly loose. This part of our grip, our thumb and our forefinger, is called the fulcrum, and it is the pivot point. We want to make sure that we play with a closed fulcrum, which means I don't have a big gap right there between my thumb and my full finger. We want to have that closed. That does not mean we're going to grip the stick tightly. There's going to be a little bit of space between there. That's okay. Some other common problems you'll see with grip, you'll see the thumb way too low on the stick, almost underneath it. We've got to avoid that. Sometimes you'll see the thumb too high on the stick, which causes many problems as well. So if we just remember, keep the thumb down the side of the shaft of the stick, close our fulcrum, fingers gently wrapped around the outside, have about 1.5 to 2 inches of stick coming out of the back of the hand. As we make sure our fingers are gently wrapped around the stick, we roll our hands over, and this is our basic beginning matched snare drum grip. If we do this correctly, we should have great success as we move forward into the future exercises. Now let's learn a roll skeleton that you can use at faster tempo music. We talked about using 1/16 notes as our skeleton in slower music. Those are going to sound a bit frantic if the tempo is a little brighter. So what we're going to use instead are triplets. We'll do with the same pattern of starting with quarter notes, go into alternating triplets, and then multiple bounce those triplets. So it should sound like this. And if we go faster, then go back and repeat the exercise on your weak hand, and you can gradually begin to speed it up. Listen for consistency of sound and that you have a nice, smooth roll. Now let's take our multiple bounce stroke that we just learned and apply it to a couple of exercises that over time will allow it to transform into a multiple bounce roll. The first exercise is quite slow, and it sounds like this. We're going to play one measure of alternating quarter notes, and then one measure of alternating buzz strokes. So if I play the whole exercise, then go back and repeat the exercise starting on the left hand. The next step will be to speed it up a little bit, where instead of playing in quarter notes, we're going to play in eighth notes. So we'll do a measure of alternating eighth notes, followed by a measure of alternating multiple bounce strokes in eighth notes. If I put those two measures together, it sounds like this. Now that doesn't sound like a roll yet, but as we speed up and our technique gets better, it will transform into a nice multiple bounce roll. So let's take an exercise that will help us get there. We are now going to use 1/16 notes to create our multiple bounce roll. So we will play a measure of alternating 1/16 notes, and then a measure of alternating multiple bounce strokes. So if I put it together, if my fulcrum is too firm when I'm doing my multiple bounces, I will get something that sounds like this. You must relax the fulcrum so that it can get more bounce out of the stroke. If my fulcrum is too soft, I will get something that sounds like this. We have to get a little more pressure on the top of the stick and press the tip into the head more. Notice how I am not using my wrist for the multiple bounce stroke. That would look like this. It is very difficult to get a smooth multiple bounce stroke at that speed using your wrists. So we're going to use that dipping elbow technique and the locked wrist. One more note about practicing your multiple bounce rolls. It's good to practice them on a pad, but in particular, rolls must be practiced on a snare drum, as the drum has a completely different feel and sound than the pad. Start slow, work through the exercise sequence, and work for a smooth, consistent sound. Let's learn a common approach to stickings that you will use when you are reading snare drum music. One of the most common problems with young players is they're not sure which sticking they should use when they're presented with a piece of music. The natural sticking method is a consistent pattern that we use when we see standard snare drum rhythms. If you look at the example, you will notice in measure 1 that we have one measure of alternating 16th notes. Right, left, right, left. The natural sticking pattern is based around that sticking combination of right, left, meaning any note that comes on a downbeat or an and will always be on a right stick. Any note that comes on an E or an will always be on a left stick. If you look at measure 2, we have 2 16th notes followed by an 8th note. The natural sticking for that would be right, left, right. As we said earlier, any note that comes on a downbeat or an and will be on the right hand. Any note that comes on an E or an will be on the left hand. So 2 16th and an 8th note sticking would be right, left, right, right, left, right. In measure 4, we have an 8th note followed by 2 16th notes. The sticking for that rhythm would be right, right, left. The first 2 notes come on the downbeat and the and, which would mean they're going to be on the right hand. So that measure's sticking would be right, right, left, right, right, left, right, etc. In measure 6, we have a dotted 8th note followed by a 16th note. The sticking for that measure would be right, left, right, left, right. The first note of that rhythm comes on a downbeat, 1, and the last note of that rhythm comes on the which we know will be a left hand. Right, left, right, left, right. And in the final measure of this exercise, we have a 16th note followed by an 8th note followed by another 16th note. That rhythm would be right, left, left, right, left, left, right, left. The first note comes on the downbeat, so it would be a right. The second note comes on an E, so it would be a left. The last note comes on a which would also be a left. On the exercise, you can see I have a check pattern of 16th notes in between each of these measures with the natural stickings. I'll now demonstrate what this exercise would sound like with the proper stickings. It's also great to practice this exercise with the hands separated. It enables you to be able to hear if your hands are doing the correct natural sticking. Practice that with a metronome. Make sure you're consistent in your tempo. This exercise is invaluable when you're reading snare drum music and you know you have a go-to set of stickings that you can always rely on when you see these rhythms. Now let's learn an exercise that will implement all of the paradiddle rudiments we've just worked on. We're going to play 4 single paradiddles, 4 double paradiddles, 4 triple paradiddles, and 4 paradiddle diddles, like this. Then you can begin to speed it up, and it will sound like this. Practice with a metronome. Have a great time. Let's talk about the parts of the drum. Most of you will be playing on a snare drum. There are other types of drums that you can play on, but we're going to basically concentrate on our snare drum. The surface that we strike is called the batter side head. On the other side, we have what's called the snare side head. You can see these wires going across the head. This is called the snare bed. And the snare bed is controlled by the strainer. The strainer controls the tension of the snares by this knob. You can tighten it and it'll give a tighter snare sound, or we can loosen it and it will be much looser. This is the throw off, and if I take the throw off and put it all the way down, now the snare sounds more like a tom. If I pull the strainer back up, now we have a snare sound. These are called our tension rods or lugs, and that controls how high the pitch of the drum will be. The tighter they are, the higher the pitch will be on the drum. And that is your snare drum. Let's talk about posture while we're playing our drum. Your posture is going to be very critical to your success. And it's really easy to get lazy about your posture, but you cannot do it because it's going to affect your technique. It's going to affect the sound you pull out of the instrument. So let's talk about, first off, how we approach the drum. When I put my arms up, I want to be in a comfortable position, and the tips of the sticks are basically right in the middle of the head. If I'm having to pull my elbows back, I'm too close to the drum. If I'm stretching my arms out, I'm too far away from the drum. If I can just pull my arms up and gently set them there, I should be basically right in the center of the drum. Your feet should be comfortably apart, and you really need to make sure that your knees are bent. You're going to be standing and playing quite a bit. If you keep your knees locked, you will eventually pass out. That's not what we want. So our legs are gently bent, and we're standing comfortably away from the drum. Everything should be comfortable. If something hurts, you're doing it wrong. And that is our basic posture for snare drumming. The key to your success as we continue learning these exercises is going to be lots of repetition. Our drums can be very loud, and most of you might not even have a snare drum. You might be working on a practice pad. There are many different types of practice pads. One of the great benefits of the practice pad is that it saves our ears from the continuous beating they get from the snare drum sound. As you can tell, that is quite softer than playing on the drum. If you are playing on a drum, I highly recommend that you use hearing protection. Because of the amount of time you're going to spend repeating these exercises, it will take a toll on your hearing. There are several different types of earplugs that you can use in your practicing. There are basic foam earplugs that you can pick up at your local pharmacy and even at your local hardware stores. You have a little more sophisticated version of rubber earplugs. And you also have quite high-end earplugs that are molded to your ear that try to filter out specific sound sources. All of these are great options to help you protect your hearing. If you're playing on a pad, you need to be aware that it is very important that you also play on a drum. Exercises that you've been practicing on the pad and sound really good might not sound as good when you play them on the drum. So after you've cleaned them and done the hard work on the pad and worked out the technique, take the pad off, play it on a snare drum, and that will let you know exactly what you actually sound like. We're almost ready to begin playing. Before we do that, there's another tool that you need to be aware of that you must practice with. It's called a metronome. A metronome provides a steady tempo for you to practice with. If you are not keeping a steady tempo, you are not going to be a very successful percussionist. Many of the parts that we play, the point of those parts is to provide rhythmic stability to the ensemble that you're playing with. A metronome helps to keep us honest. And all it does, again, is provide a steady pulse. There are many different types of metronomes available today. You can go to a local music store and buy just a metronome. Another great option is there are several free metronomes that you can get as apps on a phone. That being the case, there is really no excuse anymore for a student not to practice with a metronome. But I still find many students will not practice with a metronome because they find it inconvenient. I like to use this analogy. A metronome is like medicine. Many students have a metronome, but they don't use them. If you have medicine and you don't take it, you're not going to get any better. The metronome is your medicine. You must take your medicine every day, which means you must put it on your stand and you must turn it on. If you do that, once again, you're going to be a much more successful percussionist and you will see your practice sessions reveal more results. Now let's apply multiple bounce strokes to a quarter note roll at faster tempos. If you look at the example and you look at measure 3, this is how you would normally see quarter note rolls displayed in music. But again, we're not simply going to play one multiple bounce stroke on each quarter note. We've got to fill in that space. As we discussed earlier, at faster tempos, we're going to use triplets as our roll skeleton. So looking in measure 1, we have this rhythm. In measure 2, I'm going to put a multiple bounce on each note of the triplet. And measure 2 is going to sound exactly like measure 3. So if I play the whole exercise together, as I said, measure 3 is how you will normally see quarter note rolls written in music. Take this at this tempo, or slower if you need to, and then gradually speed it up. Let's learn an exercise that will help us implement roll skeletons. We're going to use these skeletons at a slow to medium tempo. The tempo of the music is going to determine what rhythmic bass you use for your skeletons. The slower the music is, the faster your skeleton is going to have to be. The faster the music is, the slower your skeleton can be. So at this slow and medium tempo, we're going to use 16th notes as our skeleton. We're going to start off by using one measure of quarter notes, then go into one measure of alternating 16th notes, and then we're going to do one measure of 16th note multiple bounce strokes, which is going to make our roll. It should sound like this. Make sure you start on your weak hand as well. Make sure you're listening for a smooth, consistent sound on your roll. And hopefully you can see that my hand motions are basically still playing 16th notes, and that's how I keep track of where I am at in that roll. That is my roll skeleton. One of the biggest challenges young players have when executing multiple bounce rolls is getting lost in the roll and not knowing when to stop. The longer the roll, the easier it is to get lost. One of the ways we can help to prevent that is by using what we call roll skeletons. A roll skeleton is simply a bass rhythm that is used to meter the roll. For example, if you had a whole note roll, we would think a grouping of 16th notes throughout that measure to keep track of where we are at in that roll. In other words, we would be thinking 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. If the tempo was much faster than that, we would use triplets as our skeleton, and we would think 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. In the next couple of exercises, we will practice implementing roll skeletons at various different tempos. Now that we know many of the basic strokes, we can now start moving into learning rudiments. Rudiments are the basics and fundamentals of all drumming. Pretty much anything you listen to can be broken down into its rudimental form. Therefore, we must learn and practice the rudiments in order to be able to perform the excerpts that are going to be expected of us. There are 4 different types of rudiment categories. We have roll rudiments, we have flam rudiments, we have drag rudiments, and we have diddle rudiments. So let's get started and jump in and start learning our rudiments. Let's set up our drum. You're going to have a snare drum stand. There's many different types. But the height of your stand and the way you set it up is extremely important. So we're going to open up the legs of our stand. You could open it up all the way like this, but you don't want to do that. The stand is meant to be placed so the pad is going to be basically flush with the ground. You also don't want the legs too tight, because obviously the drum will tip over very easily if you have that. So we're going to put them out so we have a nice solid base for our stand. When you tighten the screws on your stand, please make sure you don't over tighten them. Just finger tight is all it takes, and they will hold just fine. This is called the basket. We're going to open that up, and you can see there's a device here that we spin one way or another, and that will tighten or loosen the basket to hold onto the drum so it doesn't fall off. So now we're going to take our snare drum. This is really important. You need to make sure that your strainer is right in front of you and that the snares are leading away from you. You also want to make sure that the arms of the basket are not on your snares, or that will impact your sound. Once you have it placed on the stand, you can just lightly tighten up the basket. And if done correctly, you can pick up your snare drum and the stand will go with it. Once again, make sure that the strainer is right in front of you, the snare's moving away from you. The reason we do this is because you need to be able to turn the strainer on and off easily in the middle of playing. There's many times you have to do that in the middle of a piece, and it's very difficult to do if the strainer is over here. Also, we need to have the snare bed right over our playing surface to get a consistent sound. The next thing we need to discuss is the height of the drum. A good general rule is to think about belt level, but it really depends upon the length of your arms and your body shape. You basically want to make sure that when you put your arms up, that it's a comfortable height. If it's too low, you're going to look like this, and that's going to cause bad technique. If it's too high, you're going to look like this, and that's going to cause bad technique as well. We just want to be able to put our hands up naturally, like we were going to set them on a counter or a table, and be right at this level. You'll be able to tell if the drum is at the right height after you've played for a little while and you get the feel for it. And that is how you set up your snare drum. Let's learn an exercise that will help us practice our paradiddles and eventually be able to apply them to music. Starts off with a measure of alternating 16th notes, like this. And then we will do a measure of paradiddles. So if I put measure 1 and measure 2 together, we get this. It's a great idea to separate the hands to make sure that your stickings are accurate. And then once again, we can begin to speed it up. As you become more comfortable with that, you can gradually begin to speed that up. Use your metronome, go up in small increments, and you'll begin to feel your hands become much stronger and comfortable with the paradiddle. Let's learn a couple of exercises to help us improve our single stroke 4s. The exercise is going to sound like this. So the exercise starts with a measure of alternating rebound strokes, counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then we go into the single stroke 4, which in this instance we're going to count as triplet and triplet and triplet and triplet and. If I start the exercise with my left hand, we should get the same result. The second exercise is very similar. We're going to use the same 8th note pattern as the first measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then we're going to use the single stroke 4 starting on the upbeat. So the counting for that would be 1, triplet 2, triplet 3, triplet 4, triplet. 1, triplet 2, triplet 3, triplet 4, triplet. So if I play the entire exercise together, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, triplet 2, triplet 3, triplet 4. Start extremely slow, use your metronome, and once you've mastered those at a slow tempo, then you can begin to speed it up, and it will sound like this. or both of these exercises will really help you to develop your single stroke fours. Let's take the rebound stroke and apply it to another very common rudiment. This rudiment is called the single stroke four, also using a single stroke pattern, which means we're alternating back and forth. This rudiment sounds like this. You also want to, as we did with the single stroke roll, start this pattern with your left hand as well. You need to make sure you're nice and relaxed. You're letting the stick rebound off of the head, and again, we're always listening for that consistent tone. If you're getting something like this, you need to check the position of your sticks on the head, you need to check your grip, you need to check your stroke, so we get that consistent sound we're looking for. The next rudiment we're going to learn is closely related to the single stroke four. It's called the single stroke seven. It sounds like this. It is simply 7 rebound strokes alternated and repeated over and over again. As usual, we need to practice this extremely slow. Make sure we're staying very relaxed, using nice rebound strokes and letting the stick bounce off of the head. After you've practiced this rudiment several times on the right hand, do the same thing starting on the left hand. Let's learn an exercise that will help us implement roll skeletons. We're going to use these skeletons at a slow to medium tempo. The tempo of the music is going to determine what rhythmic bass you use for your skeletons. The slower the music is, the faster your skeleton is going to have to be. The faster the music is, the slower your skeleton can be. So at this slow and medium tempo, we're going to use 16th notes as our skeleton. We're going to start off by using 1 measure of quarter notes, then go into 1 measure of alternating 16th notes, and then we're going to do 1 measure of 16th note multiple bounce strokes, which is going to make our roll. It should sound like this. Make sure you start on your weak hand as well. Make sure you're listening for a smooth, consistent sound on your roll. And hopefully you can see that my hand motions are basically still playing 16th notes, and that's how I keep track of where I am at in that roll. That is my roll skeleton. Let's talk about stick choice while we're playing the snare drum. The type of stick you use is very important because every stick produces a different sound out of the head. Think about golf. You won't ever see a professional golfer using a putter on the driving range. That's the wrong tool for the job. Just like in golf, there are many, many different types of drumsticks, and we want to make sure we use the right stick for the job. But first, let's talk about the parts of a drumstick. So here's a basic snare drum stick. Notice the bead, which is the end right here, is fairly big. We then go into what's called the shank of the stick, which is smaller and then tapers out. Then we go to the shaft of the stick, and finally the end of the stick, which is called the butt of the stick. If I use this stick on my drum and I play in the correct part of my drum, it should produce a pretty clear tone. If I use a different type of snare drum stick, notice that this bead is much smaller than the previous stick I used, and it's not quite as long. So the tone it produces is going to be a little bit different. a little bit crisper. A lot of times you will see young players come in with sticks that are not appropriate for a snare drum. This is a drum set stick. Notice it is long and skinny at the tip. It is also a much lighter and thinner stick. You will hear a significant difference with this stick. Compare that to a snare drum stick, a much fuller sound. You also have sticks with a nylon tip, which will usually give you a brighter sound as well. There are many different types of snare drum sticks. Find one that feels good to you and is an appropriate snare drum stick, and you should be great in your practicing. Now let's take all those tap and accent combinations that we just worked on and combine them into one exercise. The exercise is going to start, just like the previous exercises, with one measure of tap 16th notes. And then we are going to put one measure of each of the accent patterns that we used in the previous 4 exercises. So it will sound like this. Practice that exercise slowly, always with a metronome. Check your heights in a mirror and listen to the quality of sound that you are pulling from your instrument. If you can do all of those things, then you can gradually start to speed it up. Good luck. Let's take those hand-to-hand combination accent patterns that we just worked on and combine them into one exercise. It will start off with one measure of taps like we have done in the other exercises. And then we will just go through the series of accents that we went through on the individual exercises. So we will do one measure of accents on the downbeat and the E. We'll do one measure of the accents on the E and the and. We'll do one measure of the accents on and ah. And then finally we'll end up with the accents on and downbeat of the next grouping of 16th notes. It will sound like this. As with all the exercises, start slowly, make sure you have your metronome on. Listen for your consistency of sound, stick to stick. If you have that under control, then you can start to speed it up, and it would sound like this. These concepts will be applied to many different applications in your percussion studies. I previously demonstrated a series of upstrokes and downstrokes performed together. These are commonly called tap accent exercises. Let's learn some exercises that will help you to incorporate taps and accents into your playing. The first exercise is simply going to be a measure of 16th note taps alternated. And then we're going to put an accent on beat 1 of the next measure and play one measure of accents. So the exercise together will sound like this. Notice that after I play the accent, my stick plays the downstroke and stays at that tap height. Do not let it come back up to a 3 or 4 inch height. That's a very common problem as we're learning tap accent exercises. If that is occurring, you need to go back to playing bucks and squeeze at the bottom to make that stick stay at the 1.5 inch to 2 inch level. Let's learn some variations of this same exercise. We're going to play the same introduction measure of all taps, and now we're simply going to put the accent on the left hand on E, if we're counting 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E, and that would sound like this. Now we're going to move the accent one beat later, and we're going to put it on the and. It's going to come back to the right hand. And finally, we'll switch it to the of the grouping of 4/16 notes and put it on the left hand again. As usual, it's very important to practice this exercise with a metronome and listen for the consistency of sound you are pulling from your instrument. The next stroke we're going to learn is our double bounce, which is related to the double stroke. A double bounce is going to go significantly faster, but again, it's going to be 2 notes on the same hand. Notice that my hand is not making 2 distinct strokes. I'm doing 1 rebound stroke, doing a slight bit of pressure with my fulcrum, which forces the tip of the stick back into the head and it bounces back in. If my fulcrum is too tight, then I'm going to get a multiple bounce, which we've already discussed. So if I relax that fulcrum and make it a little bit softer, we're going to get that double bounce we're looking for. We use quite a bit of finger for double bounces as well. So I want to show you an exercise that can help isolate those fingers. If we turn our sticks backwards, so the butt of the stick is coming out the front, notice we still have about 2 inches coming from that point, and I just start playing double strokes on my forearm. This forces me to start using my fingers. Notice I am not using wrist. That is not the point of this exercise. Isolate the fingers. As we turn the sticks back around to our normal playing position, if we do that on the drum, we get double bounces. The next rudiment we will learn is the double paradiddle. It is very similar to a single paradiddle, so let's review the single paradiddle. Remember, a single paradiddle is right, left, right, right, and then we start on the left hand and go left, right, left, left. A double paradiddle simply adds 2 more single strokes to the beginning of a single paradiddle. So, right, left, right, left, right, right would be a double paradiddle, and then start on the left hand, left, right, left, right, left, left. Here's an example. It's always great to separate your hands onto those different sound sources so you can check your stickings. Make sure you have your metronome on, Practice nice and relaxed, and you should begin to master the double paradiddle. The next stroke we're going to learn is the double stroke, and it is exactly what it sounds like. 2 strokes on each hand. At slower tempos, where we're going to start, you will notice I am using quite a bit of wrist. My fingers are still very relaxed around the stick. An alternate exercise I would like you to work on to help build the wrist muscles is to play on your body. This forces us to isolate those wrist muscles and use them in a way that they're not used to being used. When you're playing your double stroke, be careful and make sure that each stroke has the same volume. A common problem with double strokes is the first stroke is louder than the second, like this. That's not what we're looking for, and as we speed up the stroke, it's not going to give us the sound we are looking for. So practice slowly, practice in front of the mirror, and stay relaxed. That's a good first step towards learning our double strokes. The next stroke we're going to learn is called a downstroke. A downstroke starts high like a rebound stroke and ends low like a tap stroke. So it looks like this. The key is getting the stick to stop low. The way we get it to stop is we simply squeeze the fulcrum just a little bit to stop the stick from rebounding back. So I start high, squeeze. Start high, squeeze. Same thing with the left hand. Start high, squeeze. When you squeeze, don't squeeze too hard, just enough to keep the stick from bouncing back up to a rebound stroke. This can be a challenging stroke to learn at first, but it is very important. Once again, practice it in front of a mirror several times so you can check the height at the bottom of the stroke. About 1.5 to 2 inches off the drum is where we want to end. Cloning can also be extremely helpful in this situation. Very important that you practice this slowly at first and make sure the technique is sound. The next rudiment we're going to learn is called a drag. A drag is similar to a flam in that it has grace notes before a primary note. In this case, though, there are 2 grace notes. If I add the primary stroke, the grace notes are going to be a double bounce, not a double stroke. But the concept is basically the same as a flam. We drop the sticks into the head. Just like with flams, be careful not to re-attack. In other words, don't pick up the sticks before you play your drag. We just drop the sticks into the head, not. Eventually, you will be able to speed them up and they will sound more like this. Practice them slowly, practice them with your metronome, and have a great time. The final rudiment we will be discussing is the flam accent. This is another rudiment that sounds like its name. Flam accent, flam accent, flam accent. It has a triplet feel to it. It starts with a flam, and is followed by 2 alternating tap strokes, and then a flam on the opposite hand. Flam, accent, flam, accent. As you execute the downstroke on the flam, make sure you give that little squeeze at the bottom to control that stick and don't allow it to bounce up too high. Separate your sticks so you can hear the rhythm that each stick is playing. Practice it in front of a mirror to watch your heights, listen for a consistency of sound, and as always, use your metronome. Our next rudiment is one of the most useful and functional rudiments that you can learn. It's called a flam tap, and it is exactly what it sounds like. A flam followed by a tap. The tap occurs on the same stick that played the primary stroke. So I squeeze at the bottom, and that sets me up to play the flam tap on the opposite hand. The stroke that we are using is a buck, which we learned earlier. If you execute your bucks properly, you're going to have a much easier time learning your flam taps. It's very important that you practice these slow and in front of a mirror. I also highly suggest that you separate your hands. Use your metronome, listen to your quality of sound. Good luck. The next rudiment we're going to learn is called a flam. A flam consists of a primary downstroke and a tap stroke, which we call a grace note, that occur at the same time. Notice when I play this that all I do is drop the sticks into the head. A common problem that young players have is what we call re-attacking. They get set up to play a good flam, but then they lift both sticks back up again, adding an extra movement that is not needed for the rudiment. If we switch to the other hand, we just drop the sticks into the head. This takes a lot of practice and a lot of patience. You need to practice your flams in front of a mirror and watch your stick heights, especially the stick height of those grace notes. I recommend to start that you do several flams on one hand and then switch to the other hand before you start trying to alternate between hands. When you do start to alternate, remember our buck exercise. Squeeze at the bottom, and that stick will be ready to play that next grace note on the alternating flams. Practice them slowly, practice them with a metronome. Now let's learn a multiple bounce stroke. This stroke actually has a number of different names and is referring to a multiple bounce roll. Other names you will hear for this roll are a press roll, or sometimes you'll hear it called a buzz roll. For our purposes, we're going to call it a multiple bounce roll. This stroke is very different than anything we've done up to this point because This stroke uses almost exclusively arm. I want you to imagine that you have a rod going through your forearm, and we're going to pivot our arm around that rod. Notice how I am not breaking my wrist when I'm making this motion, and my elbow is dipping down. This is very different than the wrist strokes we've been using on the other exercises. So if I'm using this motion and my elbow is dipping, I put the stick into the head and press just slightly to get as many bounces as I possibly can. Notice I am not using my wrist. That is going to be your first reaction, is to try and use your wrist. So make sure you practice this in front of a mirror. Your goal is to get as many bounces per stroke as you can get. This exercise takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. If I press too hard on the stick, I will get this sound. We call that a dead stroke, and I'm actually putting so much pressure on the stick that it's burying the tip of the stick into the head. You need to relax the fulcrum as the energy of the bounce starts to wear out. Practice this stroke very slowly and concentrate on trying to get as many bounces per stroke as you can. Now that we know how to hold our sticks correctly, we are ready to learn our first stroke. That stroke is called the rebound stroke, and it's probably the most basic stroke we use in drumming, and one that you will use quite often as well. So let's hold our sticks the way we've been taught. We're nice and relaxed. Our thumbs are going down the side of the shaft. Our fulcrum is closed. We call this a rebound stroke because we use the rebound of the stick bouncing off of the head to lift it back up again. So I want you to think about bouncing a basketball. When you bounce a basketball, we don't lift our hand back up as the ball comes back up. The ball bounces back up and lifts our hand back up to this position. We throw it down, the ball brings it back up again. If I close my hand into the match grip position and do that same motion as bouncing a basketball, that is our rebound stroke. So if I put my stick in my hand and I start right up here in an up position and I throw the stick into the head, it's going to bounce back for me. Once again, remember we talked about consistency. We want to make sure the sound we are pulling from the drum is the same. If you're getting something like this, then the motion you are using is not the same. You should be able to do the same thing with your opposite hand as well. Throw the stick into the head and let it rebound back up to this position. My fingers are extremely relaxed on the stick. If I hold the stick too tight, watch what the motion is. I am now lifting the stick back up because my fingers are too tight around the stick. If I relax my fingers, we'll get a clear, clean rebound stroke. The first rudiment we're going to learn is called a single paradiddle. A single paradiddle is made up of two single strokes followed by a double stroke. The first single stroke is an accented stroke, so it's going to be a down stroke, followed by a tap stroke, and then two double strokes. Par-a-did-dle. If I play it on the drum, then you would repeat that on the left hand. paradiddle, paradiddle. A great way to practice rudiments is to separate the sound. In other words, I'm going to put my right hand on the rim, and then I can hear more easily what each hand is doing separately. So if I play a paradiddle with my hands separated, it's much easier to hear if my hands are consistently playing the stickings that is required of them. The other thing that separating your hands does can help you if you would like to clone. If I focus just on the one hand and listen to the rhythm that it's playing, now I have a rhythm I can clone. Then put the hands back together on the same sound surface. And keep working that until the sticking comes comfortable for you. Again, if you're having to think about the sticking, you need to slow it down until it becomes more natural. Then you can gradually begin to speed it up. Concentrate on a steady, smooth tempo and a consistent quality of sound. At the basis of all drumming are exercises that we call rudiments. You will find rudiments in every aspect of playing a percussion instrument. We're going to take the rebound stroke and apply it to one of our most basic rudiments, which is called the single stroke roll. If I'm playing 8 on a hand, my sticks are working separately of each other. If I now alternate back and forth, right, left, that is a very slow single stroke roll using the rebound stroke that we just learned. Make sure you're listening for a consistent tone, a consistent tempo, and a consistent volume at all times. Practice it with a metronome and make sure you practice it slowly. Resist the temptation to go too fast, too soon. If you do that, you're going to create tension all up and down your arms, and tension will never give you the speed that you're looking for. Go slowly, and when you feel that relaxation in your body will tell you when you're ready to start speeding up the single stroke roll. Now let's learn about a tap stroke. A tap stroke is played about 1.5 inches to 2 inches off of the drum. It takes a little more control because you do not get as much rebound from the head since the stick is coming from such a short distance. But it is a very important stroke to master. Exercises we can do to help master this stroke would be to take 8 on a hand, which we learned when we did our rebound stroke, but play it with tap strokes instead, which would sound like this. You'll find at a slow tempo like that you will primarily be using wrist to control the stick. As you get faster, you might begin to start using a little bit of finger with this stroke. We also want to incorporate cloning into this exercise to help that weak hand catch up to our dominant hand. That would sound like this. This is a great exercise to practice in front of the mirror. You might think your tap stroke is about 1.5 to 2 inches off the head, but when you watch the mirror, you might see that you're actually 4 to 5 inches off of the head. It takes a lot of control and a lot of discipline. Take your time, practice it slow, and then you can begin to speed it up. Good luck. Our next rudiment will be the triple paradiddle. You can probably guess what the sticking for this rudiment will be, as it's very similar to the single paradiddle and the double paradiddle. The triple paradiddle sticking is simply right, left, right, left, right, left, right, right, followed by left, right, left, right, left, right, left, left, with an accent at the beginning of each of the paradiddles. Here is an example, slowly. Para, para, paradiddle, para, para, paradiddle. Separate your hands. Make sure you're listening for the consistency of your sound on those tap strokes. Practice it slowly, practice it with your metronome, and then you can gradually begin to speed it up. The next rudiment we're going to learn is the paradiddle diddle. This is very similar to the paradiddle in that it starts with the paradiddle sticking, right, left, right, right, but then adds another double stroke to the end of that, left, left. So the entire sticking would be right, left, right, right, left, left, with an accent on the first stroke. The difference between this rudiment and the other paradiddles we have learned is this rudiment does not alternate. If you start with your right hand, it will always start with your right hand. Here's an example. Notice how it did not alternate, it always started on the same hand. I'm going to separate my hands now. And now starting with the left hand. Make sure your tap strokes are staying about 1.5 to 2 inches off the drum. Gradually start to speed it up and use that metronome. Good luck. The next stroke we're going to learn is called the upstroke. It is the opposite of the downstroke in that it starts low, about 1.5 to 2 inches off the head, and ends high where a rebound stroke starts, like this. This stroke can feel a little awkward at first, so it's very important that you practice it slowly. You also need to make sure that we don't do what we call a re-attack, where you start with the stick in the right position, and without knowing it, you pick it back up again and drop it into the head. Just start with it 1.5 inches to 2 inches off the head and drop it into the head and pick it back up again. Repeat with the left hand. And you'll have a good start. You will notice that with this stroke, you have to use your wrist to lift it back up again. There's not enough energy in the rebound for the stick to get back to this height. You have to use your wrist. Do not use your arm. only your wrist. Really important that you practice this very slowly. Practice in front of a mirror so you can check your heights. Take your time. Thank you for joining me for this series of videos on the fundamentals of beginning snare drumming. I hope you have found the information presented here valuable. If you practice these concepts and techniques, you will go a long way to becoming a great young musician. I'm Heath with Musician's Toolkit, and always remember, have a great time and keep drumming.